and an act of hate. We are still learning all the facts. This is an open investigation. We've reached no definitive judgment on the precise motivations of the killer. The FBI is appropriately investigating this as an act of terrorism, and I've directed that we must spare no effort to determine what, if any, inspiration or association this killer may have had with terrorist groups.
If the left still will not define radical Islam, how can we expect to defeat terror?
Yeah, it's a good question. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser is the founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. And I'll start off with that question right there. Why is the president, why is he still so hesitant to call it what it is? And how does that impact our fight against terrorism?
Well, I think his advisors and the entire method of operation is one of enabling. It's one of basically allowing blasphemy laws to dominate his strategy, which is he appeases the Saudis, the Qataris, and others that don't want us ever to name Islamism, and you can't treat that which you cannot diagnose. In order to diagnose it, you have to name it, and it's an enabling thing that we're doing. We need an intervention against the Muslim community to understand that they need to get angry against theocracy, against political Islam, that it's not just the violence, it's the precursors, the hate, the homophobia, the misogyny, the hate against free speech that happened with Charlie Hebdo, and now the attacks on the homosexual community. This is not a surprise. We have to reform this and use that R word, but unfortunately the president doesn't want to acknowledge that Muslims have to reform the ideology. He just wants to push it aside, that it's not a problem, and we continue this whack-a-mole program.
Yeah, and by not calling it radical Islam, do you believe that that contributes to people perhaps not doing what we telling them to do, which is if you see something, say something, for fear of being labeled a racist?
Absolutely. We saw this with Fort Hood. He had his card, Soldier of Allah, and other things. And well, every time we see things they were posting on the internet, the San Bernardino shooters were going to a school in Pakistan online, the Al Huda school. Salafi jihadi ideology is ignored, and we cannot have a seat at the table as reformers if we do not identify it as Islamism and therefore acknowledge that the House of Islam needs to repair, and is at that time in history that America was when it defeated theocracy. And right now, because our allies of the Iranians, the Saudi Wahhabis, the Pakistanis, the Qataris, they don't want us to acknowledge that it's political Islam, because their incubators are creating these ideas, and they fund it in countries like Syria, and they want free-thinking Muslims to either stay in their prisons or stay quiet in America, and we can no longer do that. It's a sentence, and it's surrender to the ideology of the Sharia state.
Zuhdi, yesterday, earlier in the presser, you had one of the Muslim leaders talking about this. He was not willing to denounce it for what it was. What is the role of the Muslim community here in America after something like this happens?
I'm glad you pointed it out. I mean, on one hand, it's nice to hear him say, please work with the FBI, etc. But come on, it's almost like the parents of an alcoholic who goes and drives through the streets and kills people, and then he says, well, we don't know how this happened. Listen, he needs to be angry. He needs to acknowledge that there are preachers in our community, in mosques. Even the mosque that the president went to visit in Baltimore had a very homophobic screed a year before. That is the problem, and these imams are facilitating it. They are part of the problem, and we need to reform it from the ground up.
All right, Zuhdi Jasser, thank you for joining us. Well, the time is now 20 minutes after the top of the hour.